Good morning from Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today is a bright sunny day. That's why I'm excited because I've had some dose of vitamin D. On this video, I'm going to take you through how to configure DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. As we know, DHCP is used to allocate not only the IP address but also other configuration parameters to the end devices automatically, like the gateway IP address, the DNS server IP address. And this really simplifies network deployment and also scale out. So the network can be able to scale without the need, for example, to increase the manpower. Now, DHCP uses the client server mode. DHCP uses the client server mode. It uses the client server mode to communicate. So the DHCP client is the one that will request configuration parameters from the DHCP server. And the DHCP server in return will give the client the required parameters. DHCP works in one of two ways, or can allocate IP address and other configuration parameters in one of two ways, either dynamically or statically. When we talk dynamically, we are giving you the resources temporarily, what we call a lease for some time. When we give you statically, we are giving you that particular IP address permanently, so that you can use it for the longest time. So in terms of application scenarios, dynamic allocation, we use it for hosts who do not need to be online throughout. So they only need this IP address temporarily. Static allocation, most of the time we use it for things like servers, for example, which need a specific, for example, private IP address all the time. So we use static allocation for that. So the objectives of this lab, you learn how to configure an interface, address pool on the DHCP server. We're also going to learn how to configure global address pool on the DHCP server, and also how to use DHCP to allocate static IP addresses, what we call static allocation. So we're going to see how to do that. Okay, so the scenario here, to reduce the workload of IP address maintenance and improve IP address utilization, an enterprise plans to deploy DHCP on the network. So we want to configure R1 and R3 as the DHCP clients. So R1 and R3 DHCP clients, while R2 here is going to be our DHCP server. Now, the other thing that we are going to do is that here we are going to use dynamic allocation. So we're going to use dynamic allocation here, while here we are going to use static allocation. The other thing is that here we are going to use interface based, while here we are going to use global based DHCP. Global. So we are going to assign from a global pool. Let me just call it global pool. Assign from global pool, assign from interface. Okay, like that. So that is the basic scenario of what we want to do. So we want this guy to be able to dish out IP addresses. Now, unlike our topology here, between R1 and R2 I've used 003, but between R2 and R3 I'm not using 4 and 3. Instead I'm using 1 and 1. So that's the difference. The router that I'm using is just the basic router with the name router. Okay, so let's go on. The configuration roadmap, we configure DHCP server and then we configure the client. So we're going to see how to do that. Configuration step number 1, we want to complete the basic configuration. So we configure the interface IP address on R2. Remember, we are not configuring any IP addresses on R3, R1 and R3. So we're only configuring on R2. So we need to configure that. So that is step number 1. So let's exactly do that. Excuse me. Okay. So on R2 here, as you can see on the background, the IP address for those particular interfaces. So we start with G003. We assign it an IP address 12.2.224. Then we go to interface G001, IP address 10.23.224. Okay. So once we are done with that, we can now go ahead and configure DHCP. To configure DHCP, we first need to enable DHCP. Now, DHCP must be enabled on both the server and the clients. And so the DHCP command must be executed before executing any DHCP related commands, regardless for DHCP servers or clients. So we must use DHCP enable for all the devices. So let's do exactly that. So we can begin here, DHCP enable. Then on R1, you must be on system view. So DHCP enable. On R3, DHCP enable, like that. Okay, so let's look at the next step, which is step number 3. So in step number 3, we want to configure the address pool. We're going to begin by an interface pool on G003. G003. So the command is you have to go to the particular interface. Then you use the command DHCP select interface. So if you do not use DHCP select interface, you cannot be able to run other commands that are related to the interface address pool. You cannot be able to run them. For example, you cannot be able to specify the DHCP server DNS list. And you can even try that. So let's just go here. It's supposed to be on R2. So here, we want to go into int G003. Let's try DHCP server DNS list. So you see, we can't be able to autocomplete that. Oh, I mistyped that, by the way. DNS list 10.0.12.2. So you see, if you do that, it tells you have please configure DHCP select interface first. So that's what we need to do first. So let's exactly do that. Okay. So DHCP select DHCP select. Let me do question mark. So you can either select global, or you can use the interface, or you can use relay. DHCP relay is beyond the scope of this course, but you can watch my HCIP videos to know how a DHCP relay agent works. So interface. So that's what you need to do. After that, we need to specify the DNS server. So DHCP server DNS lists. Then you give it the IP address of the DNS server. In this case, we want to specify the DNS server as that. Okay, so that is it about configuring. The interface pool. So generally, display this. We've only entered 2 commands on the interface G003, DHCP select interface, and the DNS. So here, this particular end devices that are connected to G003 are going to be assigned IP addresses from this network, from the 10.0.12.0/24 network. Also, we don't have to specify the gateway because those devices are going to use the IP address of this interface as the gateway address. So that's why it's quite easy to configure the interface pool. Okay, so let's go ahead now and look at how to configure the global pool. Okay, before I go to the global pool, I think it's important to mention that only a maximum of 8 DNS server addresses can be configured. So if you have several DNS servers, then you can't be able to configure multiple. What you do is that you enter the IP addresses and you separate them by spaces. So for example, 10.0.12.1, then you go ahead and type another one, maybe 10.12.3 or something. So please remember that. Okay. Oh, this DNS server we specified here, I think is wrong. We are supposed to specify 1, 2 rather than 2, 3. So let's just undo that. Okay, so int G003 DHCP. Let me see whether it's gonna overwrite it. DHCP server DNS list 10.0.12.2. Display this. Okay. Oh, it has added both of them. Okay, so let's just use the undo command. So undo DHCP server DNS list 10.0.23.2. Display this. Okay, so now we have removed that one, which was the erroneous one. We want this to be the DNS server. Okay, so let's now go ahead and configure the global address pool. To configure the global address pool, you need to begin by creating the pool by using the command IP pool, then the name of the pool. After that, use the network command to specify the IP addresses that are going to be used for that pool and the mask. After that, you can specify the DNS, and you must also specify the gateway address. And you can also specify, for example, the lease period. So let's do that. So here, quit. We want to create the pool. So the command is IP pool, then the name of the pool. We want to call this just global pool. So you can call it pool 1, you can call it pool 2, etc., etc. After that, we can specify the DNS list, so the IP address of the DNS. So we want to use that one. Then the gateway list, which is the IP address of the gateway. So it should be that one. Good. So after that, we can configure the lease question mark. Now on the lease, you can go ahead and specify the days. By default, the lease period is 1 day or 24 hours. But you can specify between that to 99. Otherwise, you can use unlimited. If you select unlimited, then the lease will be unlimited. So we want lease day to be 2 days and the hour to be 2 hours. So 2 days and 2 hours. Enter. So that's how you configure this. So display this. So we specify the gateway, the list day, and the DNS list. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to do is to configure static allocation. So we want to use the command static bind IP address. Then we choose an IP address that we want to bind to this MAC address. So this is the MAC address of this particular server, of this particular client. So really, what we want to do is to make sure that this particular interface is allocated that IP address 10.0.23.3 all the time. So we are doing static. That is what we call static allocation. Static allocation. So let's do exactly that. So okay. So the command is static bind. Static bind. Then you specify the IP address. We want to give it 10.0.23.3. Then you specify the MAC address. So if you want to get the MAC address of that interface, you can use the display command on R3. So display interface G001, like that. So now we have the MAC address here. I can highlight it, then I copy, then I can come back to R2 and paste it here. So once we have that, we can just press enter. The IP address is not in the pool 23. The IP address is not in the pool. How did I configure G001? Okay, let's just quit and see how to get around that. Display IP. Okay, or I can just go inside G001, display this 23.2. Okay. What mistake am I making? Because this IP address is okay. Okay, let's just quit, go back to the IP pool, global pool, static bind IP address 10.0.23.3. MAC, paste. Hi. What might be the problem here? What might be the problem here? Let me just confirm. Is there anything that I'm doing that is wrong? No. Why am I getting that error? Oh, did I use the network command here? I was supposed to use the network command. Oh, that is the problem. I think I forgot to use the network command to specify the network on this pole. So let's just do that. Hi, sorry about that. Okay, network 10.0.23.0 mask 24. Yeah. Okay. Now we can use static bind IP address that, and good. So now we are in it. Good. So I had forgotten to use the network command to specify the IP address range that should be assigned on this particular pool. Okay. Okay. So you can use, for example, display IP pool, the command IP pool global pool. Oh, IP pool name. Then the name of the pool, like that. So you can use that, and when you use that, you're gonna get the name of the pool, the list that you've configured. We've configured 2 days, 2 hours, the DNS server IP address, the gateway IP address. The start range, so it's beginning from .1 to .254. The total, the number used, the idle ones, etc., etc. So that's how you're able to verify the pool that you've just configured. Okay, now let's go ahead to step number 4. So here we want to enable the DHCP function on this interface of R2 to assign an IP address to R3. So to do that, we need to go, for us, we are going to this interface G001 and select the global pool, so that it can be able to assign IP addresses to R3. Okay, so int G001, and then here we use DHCP select global, just like that. Okay, so now we should be able to get it, but before that we also need to configure the clients. We need to configure the clients with this command. So we go to the particular interface that requires an IP address, and we use the command IP address DHCP -alloc. So let's do exactly that. Before we do that, maybe we can do a data capture so that we see the DORA. Process. Okay. Okay. So here we want to go to interface gigabit Ethernet 003, like that. Then we want to say IP address DHCP alloc. So that means that it's gonna get IP addresses from DHCP. Let me do D question mark. Oh, no. Let me do question mark, like that. So you can see that this one means that IP address will be allocated by DHCP. Okay. Enter. Okay. So you can see on the background that we are having the DORA packet number 1 discover, packet number 2 offer, request, acknowledgement. So we can see that the DORA has happened here, meaning that it requested, it was offered, then it requested to use that one, and the server acknowledged. And assigned it a particular IP address, which is 10.0.12.254. So we can confirm that. Here by using display IP interface brief. And we can see now that this interface has been assigned an IP address 10.0.12.254. Okay, so similarly we can close this, stop that data capture here before we enable. So we go to R3. So on R3 we go to the interface G001 IP address DHCP alloc. So we press enter, and DORA DORA happens. DORA happens. As you can see, DORA happens. Sorry. As you can see, we have the discover, the offer, the request, and the acknowledgement. So what is the offer? Which IP address did it offer here? 10.0.23.3. You remember we configured this to be given to this particular interface. So that has actually been given to that particular interface. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, just before we wind up, we can verify a few things. Display IP int brief. So we can see G001 has been assigned to 3.3. Okay. The other thing that I needed to mention is that if you use the command display IP int brief, no, IP routing table. Now, anytime you configure DHCP allocation and it gets the gateway address, then your router automatically generates a default route whose next hop is the gateway address. Default route whose next hop is the gateway address. So please remember that. That every time your DHCP will allocate your router a gateway address, then it's going to generate a default route. So anytime it receives a packet, just send it to the gateway. So that is also important to remember. Okay. Let's see here. Display IP pool name global pool. Okay. I think there must be a command to display the addresses that have been issued, but I can't remember it right now. Please read about it, research about it, so that you can find it. I wanted to see that one particularly that has been allocated to the interface G001 of R3. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. That is it for this particular video. I hope you've learned. Please share this with your colleagues and friends. And also remember to like my video and subscribe to my channel so that in future you can be able to get updates. Asanteni sana for watching this. God bless you. Bye-bye.